Okay, so welcome to the podcast. I am connecting via Zoom with Cheryl Berger. So many ways to describe who you are. I guess I'll start with just asking how you're doing.
I'm doing really well, thank you. And yourself?
I'm fantastic. I was mentioning before we hit the record button that I am in Banff for work. And as I look outside, it is snowing. So I'm sure that the ski hills are happy for that. So yeah, I'm in my happy place. So can't complain.
Great.
So so many ways to describe you. An artist. One of the things that was on your bio is an artist's soul, an engineer's mind wrapped in mindfulness, which I love. You're a mother of four daughters. You work at Bombardier, where you guys are building jets, which is awesome. And then just your list of things you do for adventure, scuba diving, horseback riding, cycling. Um, you seem like you're a busy human being.
I can be, but there's also the times where I just grab a book because I don't want to do anything.
Yeah.
But in and out post-divorce relationships, it just made me look for things to do, especially when the girls went out to university, grew up, developed their own lives. I mean, we're really close,
Hmm.
but they're not at home anymore.
Right.
Then the pandemic came at the end of a really toxic relationship. So it was a positive. I was managing as the GM for a fitness, commercial fitness manufacturer
Hmm.
internationally with the Canadian organization with the CEO, and managed to get everybody home the next day, working on soft phones, set up all the programs for our warehouse manager, what have you. So I managed the beginning of the pandemic, bought a company in Alberta from my dining room table, transferred all the assets and all the documents we had to sign. So I can be busy.
Yeah.
And in July 2020, I think when the larger businesses understood that this wasn't ending tomorrow, the organization I worked with cut across the lines without anesthetic. And so I found myself in July of 2020 unemployed for the first time, and I don't know how many eons. And for the longest time ever in my professional career, I found myself out of work for 10 months before I
Oh,
ended up with
wow.
two different jobs, like one job that lasted 6 months. She had to start paying back loans. It was a tech company. I always work with the CEO or board of directors. That's the role I love. And I'm really fit for because I have a atypical career path, just as a sidebar. So
Yeah.
I have a big toolbox I can pull from. So I found myself without a work and then into a third pandemic job. And then the CEO restructured the company and it was extra lean. I was probably the only administrative person for the Canadian organization. And so found myself without a work. Called
Wow.
somebody I knew. He said, hold on. I just had a conversation and said, the person you need is, I know who it is, but she's not available. Let me call you back in 5 minutes. So I think everything happens for a reason. Is what are the takeaways you can take? How do you grow from it so that you can move beyond it? And that's not always easy and it's not always fun,
Hmm.
but I've learned that it's important. And then to look back and say, okay, what do I do today? Who am I
Hmm.
today? Um, that came out of that. And if it hadn't been for that experience, I wouldn't have this. So then you celebrate it. So that's a
Totally.
nutshell.
So that's interesting. I was having this conversation with a friend a couple of weeks ago, and he so he quit his job, and then he was looking for a new job, and I was asking him if he was ready to take on a role. When you found yourself between jobs, was your brain going, okay, I need something now, or was your brain going, maybe I just need to take some time to decompress and kind of, reevaluate things? Because I feel like sometimes they think they're ready for the next, whatever you want to call it, adventure before they're actually ready. Sometimes we're so used to like just staying in continual motion that we don't actually take time to kind of decompress and evaluate.
Well, the decompression and evaluation was thrust upon me.
Yeah.
Um, but financially, I did need to work.
Okay.
The unemployment, when people diss the CERB that the federal government here in Canada put in place, I remind people that I'm one of those people that allowed me to pay rent and keep a
Mm-hmm.
roof over my head during the pandemic, being unemployed for 10 months. So, yes, there were program problems and some people took advantage of it, but there are people like me who it allowed us to coast through,
Mm-hmm.
looking for work, reinventing myself. If we go back to my atypical career path, I ended up being blessed with having a referral to a semi-retired executive career coach. And she helped me understand that the things I've done are a superpower, that's her word, and not a deduction from my worth and value at an organization. And most people do something and they're in finance all their careers, or they're in engineering all their careers,
Mm-hmm.
or they're in whatever it is. And they might be in different markets or whatever, but that's their bag of tricks. Where
Mm-hmm.
I've done so many different things. I've been in institutional financial sales. I've been a trader on the Montreal Stock Exchange back in the day and worked the crash. Worked with architects and design, seeing buildings being designed and redesigned. And so I've done a wide variety of things, worked in pretty much every single market you can think of. And she helped me understand, harness that. But when you're in an interview setting and they say, so what do you do? What are you good at? And I'm saying, that's a varied question. They don't want to believe you.
Right.
They don't believe somebody could have that experience because it's the word atypical is the one that's been, I've been asked to use to describe it in conversation because it said otherwise you could go on for hours. And that's not
Yeah.
fun.
No, I like that. So the description of you, an artist's soul, an engineer's mind wrapped in mindfulness. I'm always curious how people, get to where they are. Like it's not, like I think mindfulness is something that's just kind of something I've been experimenting with over the last couple of years. So, I will kind of want to step back if that's okay. I kind of want to get an understanding of, where you came from, if that makes sense. So, a couple of things that you mentioned. So let's go back to say you growing up as a child. What was maybe describe your childhood? You said your dad is sorry, German background, right? So maybe just describe what that was like. Is that, you seem like a very active person now. Is that something that was always part of your life? I'm just curious what that childhood looked like.
It was a little, and I like to put things on a line, and I've been told that pain or suffering can't be relative. So you can't say somebody else's situation is worse than mine, therefore my situation I have to not see as troublesome.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody's helped me say, but that's not real. You can't justify one experience because of what other people are experiencing that you feel or deem more difficult, traumatic, or difficult to overcome. So mine was rather crazy. My parents were married while my mother was pregnant with me. She had 3 kids in 2.5 calendar years. And then we moved every year for about 4 years because my dad was moving his way up the corporate ladder in marketing at an international organization, but we stayed in Canada, but we were going from province to city. So my mom had 3 kids, gave up her career, had 3 kids, moving from town to town. So it was kind of rock and roll. At the time, I was in what we fought against for so long and came into yelling and screaming is all-day kindergarten. I had French kindergarten in the morning and English kindergarten in the afternoon back in the 60s, so, and into 71. So that kind of frames things for people now, how old I am. But the point is that there wasn't that nurturing environment. And there was a lot of handicaps that interrupted the progress along the way, that as an adult into my 40s, I was starting to be able to perceive and understand, oh, when my youngest of 4 was in grade 2 because I had homeschooled all my children until my divorce. So my older 2 went to school for the first time, grades 9 and 10, 8 and 10, and the younger 2, the youngest was in grade 2. And we had her evaluated. Fortunately, in my circle of contacts, I knew somebody who was one of the top experts in ADD and ADHD in children. And now with the kids in a school environment, no longer in a homeschool environment, we noticed that there were some things that we needed to consider and look into. So she received her first diagnosis. And at that time, I looked at my then husband and I said, who else does that sound like to you?
Mm-hmm.
And the consultant was said, well, it's not abnormal for a parent to have ADHD if their child has been diagnosed. And especially women, apparently, it's being more and more common that have a late life diagnosis. But it hindered me in many ways because it wasn't understood. It was just considered either bad behavior or difficulties in X, Y, and Z. Although I was a very good student, it also protected me because I had this naivete that I didn't understand consequences. I didn't understand choices. I literally floated through in a little bubble and kind of just went with things. And yes, there were challenges along the way and things that thwarted my in the concept of thriving, but oblivious sounds like a terrible word, but literally oblivious. So, and I literally just kind of went through onto the next thing. After my parents divorced, my father remarried. She found an apartment for me and moved me out of the house on my 18th birthday, and nobody ever looked back. And then my dad moved out of the province. So there was a lot of fracture. I don't have a relationship with my brother and sister. So I also grew up almost like an only child because they didn't have this situation and challenge. So the childhood evolved into that. I was working 2 jobs as of 18 on my own, making an apartment. Fortunately, I had life skills, I love to cook still and everything else. So, and then just went from one job to another with every once in a while a good fairy along the way who kind of pointed me in a certain direction. And it's just self-taught, autodidact, move from one thing to the next. And here I am.
Yeah. So, and you said talking about your professional path, you said my professional path was not pursued, but rather imposed. Was that, I feel like that was kind of like your childhood up until kind of adulthood was kind of like, it wasn't a path that you necessarily pursued. It was something that was just kind of one thing imposed after another. Is that fair to say?
Yes, it's after one situation after another, whether it's choices that were not able to be identified by me or the employer because of my ADHD. It would seem perhaps there wasn't a fit at times. Other times, I was very early on adopting the hashtag Me Too because I've had those experiences and early enough in my youth. And one of them was at one of my first places of employment, one of the 2 senior partners. And so I left that job. So sometimes I left for my own choice because I can't do this. So that's why I feel imposed because those choices got made. But at the same time, then connections were made and a path became in front of me without me having to go seek something. I was an office manager, so I have those organizational gifts and administrative gifts. I was able to do things at quite a young age, fortunately, and then would do training. So I ended up replacing somebody at Burns Fry, learned the world of institutional sales in the financial realm. And from there, she was supposed to come back. And when she decided to come back, like 10 months, a year later, I found another role because there was somebody I knew who had, combined their seats on the Montreal and Toronto Stock Exchange to form a new financial enterprise based here in Montreal. And so I went there because I had trading desk skills. So I ran the trading desk and then did my securities course and ended up on the Montreal Stock Exchange on the floor, on and off as a backup and support. So it's that's where I'd say it's kind of imposed. It kind of just found its own way. And I'm grateful for my naivete, because otherwise I think I could have stressed, panicked, fallen apart, gone off the wrong path. But I was not aware of those directions, possibilities. So in a way, I was protected by my deficiency, which I wasn't named, wasn't identified, and I could not perceive for decades at
Right.
a time till later.
So I'm always curious. I have two daughters. You have four daughters. And I do realize with myself, you know, a lot of how I, for better or for worse, the way that I raise my kids is um affected by the way I was raised, I guess, if that makes
Of
sense.
course.
And so, you know, and some things are good and some things are bad, right? I'm just like, so, but you know, I'm conscious of it, and I'm trying to make sure that my kids are raised. I want them to have a better childhood than I had. Having said that, I think I had a pretty good childhood, but I'm always aware of that. So for you, having had, you know, trauma in your childhood, how did that affect the way that you raised your kids and your relationship with your daughters?
Um, my focus was on fun.
Hmm.
I grew up with a grandmother who was brilliant, um, you know, around the encyclopedia and Jeopardy all the time. So to me, knowledge was important, and to be able to
Hmm.
have fun, and to build community was really important to me. I wanted, because feeling like I had been an only child and very distant parents because of variety of circumstances, it was, you're going to be each other's best friends, you're going to love each other, and you're going to support each other, because at the end of the day, you need to know somebody's got your back. And so
Hmm.
those were priorities to me. Was it perfect? No. Did I make my own mistakes? Absolutely. And I'm sure they each have their own list, and we talk about it, and sometimes we laugh about it. Um, when my eldest was about 18 months, she could have had a conversation with you. So she
Hmm.
was extremely bright. They're all brilliant in their own individual ways, but the crucible for the homeschooling was on a road trip to Toronto to visit my mother at the time. We listened to somebody interviewed from the University of Toronto on the CBC or something, and talked about the bookstore and talked about homeschooling at the bookstore at the Toronto University. So on our way back, we stopped off, picked up two books, and we read them. I read them out loud to their dad at the time. On our way back, and by the time we got to Montreal 6 hours later, the decision was made. Why would anybody do something differently? And so we went on our adventure of homeschooling the girls, choosing a curriculum, seeing what that looked like. They were involved in theater with casts of 70 people. They sing, they dance, they were in professional choirs, did swimming lessons, competed in Irish dance. Samantha, who you've met, at a very high level. So they did do things, they did have activities, and they did grow up, but they were given opportunities at least to try whatever they felt they would like to do.
Hmm.
Where that's something that I didn't experience. So
It, it is interesting how, you know, it's when you have that negative experience as a child, how you make it, you do a 180 and you want to make sure that your kids don't have that. So I don't want to use the word blessing, but it's a very interesting how it at least gives you that perspective to say, like, I don't want my kids to experience what I had experienced. And so for them, you know, the fact that you were focused on community, the fact that you were focused on them, you know, like you said, having each other's back, that's all a result of you kind of wanting that for yourself, obviously, as a child. But the fact that you were able to be aware of that, conscious of that, and give that to your kids, um, it's sad
that's
that it's
yeah, if you don't mind me interrupting,
of
there
course not.
wasn't an awareness. It was an innate sense of feeling, because again, I
Mm,
still had that unawareness, oblivious, non-diagnosed, not perceived bubble I was still living in.
okay.
So I think it was guided by a heart sense of
Hmm.
what goodness and pleasure is. And I was excited about learning. Like I said, I'm a very curious person by nature, and I enjoy just instilling them with curiosity about the world. We would stop and look at a blade of grass, and like, so I think I brought them closer to being humans on a planet where there's everything else to discover that most people walk by on their way
Hmm.
to wherever or doing whatever. And I think it was my childlike and at times childish sense of wonder, curiosity, and heartfelt desire to be part of a community. So I created a community.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think it was more guided by that versus an intellectual observance of
Hmm.
these are roads that I don't want to go down or behaviors I don't want to repeat.
Right. So, and you mentioned in the story when you decided to homeschool your kids that you were on your way to visit your mom. So were you able to maintain a relationship with your mom after, because she kind of said at 18K, go get your own
That was my
apartment.
stepmom. My mom had left prior to that, about 2 years prior to that, and moved
Okay.
to Toronto. So I didn't see a lot of her. When I was in high school, she went to work, and during high school, she moved out.
Hmm.
But there wasn't that sort of Mayberry type, you know, relationship. So
Right.
I was out on my own and just kept going. I mean, at the time there were either phone calls or letters, and she would come to town once in a while. But when I had the kids, we did our best to try and visit more often.
Hmm.
But and we're in touch today, but there's been gaps where there's been a couple of years where I haven't heard from her. So, and I think it's circumstances. You know, I don't need to dissect it here. I don't think
Hmm.
that's the platform for it. My dad, after my divorce, met a lady who is very near and dear to me, and he's blessed to have her in his life because now, with his Alzheimer's, she's his primary caregiver for him at home. But they're in San Diego. So I do go down. I do a lot of scuba diving down there. I have a friend community down there, but it's far.
Hmm.
So now we have FaceTime, so that's helpful. But otherwise, I get down there at least twice a year for a couple of weeks at a time. So we decided after some heart-to-heart talks after my divorce, he says, I didn't know this, I didn't know that. And yes, I was building my career, but I would like to hope to think that I would have done something differently had I known.
Hmm.
And we were perfectly transparent and just said, doesn't matter.
Hmm.
We're here today.
Yeah,
So you'll see I'm
absolutely.
a big mushy.
Yeah, no, no, that's good. So you mentioned that in 2011, so you had an accident, and you said this is was a turning point to who I am now. So the accident caused, and I had to Google what these acronyms were, but TBI, so traumatic brain syndrome, and PCS, post concussive syndrome. Is that right?
Correct.
So I'm
No,
always interested to see how, you know, when you say this is what a turning point to who I am now, were you able to take the accident and turn it into a positive?
yes, but in itself, part of, if we back up for just a
Hmm.
nanosecond, part
Yep.
of ADD and ADHD development or lack of development is due to one of the factors is a skip level of brain learning. And until you go back and redo them in sequence, the ADHD is going to continue to block a variety of different aspects of functioning. So with the accident, I was working for a fashion designer, different job, CEO, and he said, I bought this building right before you joined the team, and I want you to manage the transformation of it. I have all the ideas, and this is your project to manage. Fine, great. I had some architectural. I understand, it's shopping for resources and learning more about different wood flooring and, but he was turning a wood hut into a Taj Mahal. Like it was insane. And one day before construction started, I was in the site and I just turned around quickly and smashed my face into a steel I-beam, lost
Oh my God.
consciousness. Apparently there was this hockey player, Heller, did the same thing that year, saw the stars, and then woke up on the cement floor like 20 minutes later.
Wow.
So crawled my way to my car, called the warehouse manager, called my soon to be ex-boyfriend. He didn't like having somebody who wasn't well, but better you know that than when you're 90.
Yeah.
See, it's those positives. And then, and then it took a week later. That was on a Wednesday. I was back at work on Monday, and then called my friend and I said, I need to go to the hospital. Something's not right. So then they started on work stoppage. So basically what it allowed me to do, I was on workman's compensation because it was an at-work accident. So I had that support for 4 years. I started working part-time again in 2015. Part of the benefit of that long duration and having the support I did, I had 5 sports medicine professionals with athletic trainers, an ergotherapist, etc., a concussion specialist by somebody who's doing a severe PhD in sports medicine, Laura Leslie, was that Sidney Crosby had his concussion at this point in time.
Okay.
And I think the Workmen's Compensation Board here in Montreal or Quebec realized, somebody explained to me, a medical professional, if Sid Crosby can't get back on the ice and he is the top of his fitness and the top of what's available in sports medicine, then they can't really push you out. And they tried, but anyway, long and short of it is, I think it re-allowed that brain learning and going through the cycles, because I had spent so long in the dark and whatever. They had to teach me to walk properly again. I was walking like a puppet from my shoulders and traps, like all these types of things that the body just wasn't working. So they had to reinitiate all that patterning. So that's where I say it's a blessing, because I think it reinitiated it. It gave me it let my brain get back into a developmental mode, which means I overcame a lot. And I started becoming aware of these things that I had previously been, I've used the word oblivious and unawares to. And then you become aware of the challenges, and it's like, but. So you go back, you start doing the adult journey that people do several decades before I did. So doing it when you're older isn't any more fun than doing it when you're.
Yeah, no, I can't imagine.
But so I think that was good. It gave me a reset in life.
So I like that. You just your ability to frame things in a positive way is really cool. Because with that, having to go through that and that 4-year process, and to be able to see how it helped you in the long run is really cool.
But it was hell at the time.
Yeah,
I was in a terrible depression. It was hell at the time. It literally was. You have to be able to find something good of it, or you drive yourself crazy. I would take 3 steps forward and 6 steps back. The progression was grueling, demoralizing. My kids went back to live with their dad. So you just felt like you were dying in every aspect. So if you don't come out of that and start trying to say, was this for nothing? A lot of the symptomology and the tools and the research I did, because I'm a curious person, how can I help myself deal with this, deal with that, through different foods and supplements and whatever to complement the professional treatments I was getting. All this helped when my dad's Alzheimer's symptoms started, because I was able to say to his new wife that here's what it mimics in my experience. Here's what it parallels. They're both brain situations. They might be caused for different things, but they're both having the same symptoms. So I like it to PTSD and traumatic brain injury in the military. They deal now with hyperbaric treatments because they said, we're not going to differentiate the two. PTSD is one thing, and a TBI is because of a physical incursion of some nature. But the symptoms and the road to recovery are very similar. So they started treating it as one unit thing. And so we were able to look at options for my dad, considerations and what have you. So again, I was able to say, okay, this didn't happen to me for nothing. It's going to help you. It's going to help my dad. So those are tools we wouldn't have had. That's knowledge we wouldn't have had otherwise. Then at least you can look at it and feel like, okay,
Yeah.
It really was terrible. It sucked. I really didn't want to, don't wish it on my worst enemy, but I'd meet people and say, oh, I did this, I did that. I'd say, go home, put sunglasses on, do this, do this, do this, go get medical consultation. Because like you've got a concussion. You can get a concussion from falling. You can get small hits are worse than one major hit, which a lot of people don't understand. And you don't actually have to hit your head. You just have to have a whiplash type experience where the brain is going in the opposite direction from inertia than where the skull is, and it gets bruised. So that's kind of a real simplification of it. But
So where you mentioned, mindfulness and becoming mindful. Where along the journey did you start, looking into, what mindfulness is, or was it just something that you realized, that this was part of the process that you were becoming mindful?
no, because I don't think it's really a Western train of thought. I was seeing somebody after my divorce for a couple of years who had a very esoteric side. And it took me a while to kind of start of understanding and meeting some of his circle of friends and people of like minds to start deciding what I thought of it, how I felt about it. And when that relationship ended, became a very toxic relationship. So unfortunately, but from there, I saw an invitation in my inbox. At the time, there was a lot less abuse than there is now. We're talking about, 15, 20 years ago, for a speaker giving a silent workshop in New York. And all her workshops are usually West Coast or Hawaii or whatever. And it's like, New York's doable. And I listened to some of her recordings and I liked it. And so I booked myself in, me, who you can tell is a bit of a chatty Cathy, for a week-long silent retreat on the Hudson River at an old monastery that is exclusively now for retreats, especially favoring silent retreats. Mm-hmm. And the person who was leading the week, it just spoke somehow to me, and I found something that I latched onto, and it grew from there. I think if you're open to having a better quality of life, open to having a better experience, it doesn't mean everything's going to come up rosy and you're going to win all the lotteries. But I think you can find the joy and find some passion. And there's days and weeks where it's not like I walk around. I believe in the Pollyanna mindset, but I mean, I'm not delirious, and I'm not perfect, and life isn't perfect. But I think if we can say, okay, but in this moment, in this instance, and again, instrumental was my dad's wife and helped me in this too. I remember once, and she goes, well, do your gratitudes. And I said, I don't think I'm grateful for anything. And she goes, well, you're breathing, aren't you? And so that's our joke now, because I say, well, I don't even know if I'm grateful for that. So now when a challenge comes up, I stop. And it's like, and this is where scuba diving and good training comes into play too. Because when you're diving and something happens and you're 150 feet deep in the black middle of the ocean, if something happens, you got to think, here, stop. What can I do? What are my options? Where am I? What's my air? What's my depth? Who am I with? What's our next step? Mm-hmm. So when life challenges me, because it likes to do that to all of us, it's like, okay, but in this moment, what are you going to do? You're going to breathe. You're going to find some reason to smile. You're going to look at a flower. You're going to look at something. You're going to take a walk. You're going to put on a music, put on an old movie that you love, and just stop. Just stop and pause, because this situation, unless your house is on fire or something, isn't going to stop you from existing right now. So try and de-escalate it so you're not running in panic, because when we work in panic, we can't think. And that's just a brain. It's that fight or flight response. When a bear's chasing us, we're not asked to think. We're asked to run. Yeah. So if you can slow it down enough so that you allow your brain to go back into a reflective mode. Do I have to do something now? Yes. Okay. Make a list. Do I have to do something now? No. Okay. So just breathe, do something else right now, and commit to yourself that tonight, tomorrow, whatever, you will make your list or call somebody. So those are tools I developed because suffering and feeling terrible and depressed isn't fun for anybody.
Hmm.
And it doesn't always help. And some days you're going to feel blue, or some weeks. But it's a process. Life's a process. But if you can't look back and find a happy moment and smile at something, then just keep going until you do.
Wow. Yeah, I love that. One of the things you said too is I quote unquote try. I believe that is the best we can do. And then you talked about all the things that you try to do. You try to do hot yoga twice a week. You try to do this. And then you said, I learned the hard way that to be gentle and forgiving with oneself is a key ingredient towards peaceful joy. Um, I think that's really important. I think we sometimes we're too hard on ourselves.
Yep. Yep. I was coming out of debt from right when the pandemic hit, the debt that was created because of all kinds of circumstances after my divorce, trying to build a career after being a stay-at-home mom for 18 years and things of that nature. And then the pandemic hit, and I found myself, going back into charging up cards and what have you else. So those challenges, you just need to try. What can I do today? I got a loan and I consolidated. But I think if you can try and to think
Hmm.
that you remember, you always have an option.
Hmm.
You always have an option to go outside to pick up a book or turn on a radio or call somebody you know. I don't have a big friend circle, um, but try and do something, because if you're
Hmm.
stuck and you stay and you sit with it, there are no other options.
Hmm.
So, go buy a bag of dirt at the dollar store if you have to, and find a flower and put it in a pot and bring it home. Like,
Yeah.
try and do something.
Yeah.
Because life will try and drown you. When I started diving on my first time in the Pacific Ocean, San Diego, after diving up here in our Great Lakes, Terry stopped me. And I'm like, yeah. And he says, "This is the ocean." No kidding. I had been on ocean vacations growing up. It's like, yeah, just like, New York and New Jersey and stuff. He says, "It wants to kill you." I'm like, "Excuse me?" He goes, "Today, we hope it's not its lucky day." And so little things along the way have been little seeds to me. We have a choice. We're going to go in, we're going to be mindful, I'm going to be intelligent, we're going to make the right choices. And if something goes sideways, we will stop, regroup, come out, and go diving on a different day. And
Hmm.
I think if you're trying, and another, I guess, anecdote is I was driving. I lived at the time when the kids were young, almost an hour out of the city. And I'd gone for some appointment in the city I had to go to in a part of town I've never been before. I didn't know the city that well. And I drove around, but I was running late because of things at the house with 4 little kids. And that's just the way things are. And I drove like a crazy fool down the highway. And I had to go around the block 3 or 4 times, big city blocks, to end up with a parking spot outside the door of my appointment. And all I could see rattling in my head is, if you had not sped down the highway and risked your own safety, you would have arrived at this spot because it's only available now.
Hmm.
So when those little things happen, that's where I go back to, I think, the ADHD, however God created my brain, whatever this is. And no, I'm not going to go for a label, because our business world still doesn't accept these at my level of execution. They're getting better, but they're not there yet. But I don't need it, because I've learned that I don't need, I am, and that's just what it is. And if
Hmm.
people don't like my flavor of ice cream, that's okay. There's lots of different flavors of ice cream, but they're going to be people who like Cheryl's like flavor of ice cream, and those are the people that I'll have around me. But that's taken how many decades? Over 5, to get to that understanding and appreciation.
No, and I love that. Um, when you mentioned your mindset, you said, uh, correct me if I'm wrong but you said the joy is possible after pain, even if it takes decades. The pursuit of it is worthy, and we are deserving of it.
Yes.
And to me, that is, so many people they look at if they're unhappy and they look at, something that happened to them in their childhood or something that happened to them in the past, and they point at that to say, that's why I'm unhappy. And then they live this fixed life of unhappiness. Whereas I feel like you have just done the opposite, where, you can see these moments in your past that were traumatic, whether they were from your childhood, whether they are, say an accident. We all had to experience COVID. So there's all these challenges. But as we talk, it's obvious that none of them have really, defined you. And you just keep kind of working through them. Do you see life as a process? Do you see, like, is there something that you're working towards with that gives you the energy and the ability to just continue to work through these things?
Yeah, but I think I go back to that's not necessarily an intellectual process.
Right.
Um, I had somebody a number of years ago close to me challenge me on past relationship things that hurt them
Mm-hmm.
significantly and was thwarting their ability to be in relationship with me. And it was so important that this person be in a healthy community relationship with me, that I listened to it all,
Mm-hmm.
and it destroyed me on the inside. We were in a public place and I was bawling my eyes out and I was like, I couldn't help myself. But it was like, I'm going to listen and I'm going to do every gosh darn thing I need to do to make this healthy, respectful, help you have the time and the bandwidth to trust this relationship. Um, but I challenged myself to do that because of the value I placed on this person. Um, I think, yes, going back to what you were saying a bit before, is yes, we can dwell on the things that have happened and feel that that's who we are versus what's transpired. But it's a thought process. And I'm hoping that when I share some of this sometimes, that the nugget will help somebody else find that nugget for themselves, however that looks like, what other color, shade, flavor, sound, you know, because I was gifted that from people in my life. And it's up to us to, I think the right person comes around. There's a saying, and I don't know what, if it's, they've got all these names for these Chinese prophet or Indian guru or whatever, but the teacher comes along when the student is ready.
Mm-hmm.
All I know
Yeah.
is that's something that I've heard over the years. And I think that's very, very true. We may not recognize the message, but it doesn't mean the message hasn't been heard. And at some point in time, we're going to remember that message. So if there's a message, it's like, we're all good enough. We're all worthy. We're all lovable. And we're all special. And we're all deserving to feel that. At least
Mm-hmm.
some of the time. Doesn't mean you're going to feel it every day. And I think if you're helping others, whatever that takes, if you're helping at a food bank or you have been blessed with the resources to donate to a charity in a significant way, if you're doing for something else, that comes back to you in spades. If nothing else, you can say, there was a guy this spring, and I don't generally carry a lot of cash. My girls have got me using my phone now, so I tap everywhere. And so I don't have a lot of money, but I was doing something and I had gone to the ATM, so I had money. But I only had a 20 on me, or two 20s. And it was like, oh, I don't even have $5 or a toonie for some fellow at the corner with his paper Tim Hortons cup. And so I put a 20 in his cup, and he looked at me and he goes, are you like, this is, and I said, no, just promise me you're going to do something smart and responsible for yourself. Get some food, get some shelter. And afterwards, it was like, we're big celebrators of what's called Centrate here in Quebec, or the United Way elsewhere in North America, at Bombardier. And I had missed one of the final donation periods. But then afterwards, I was like, okay, I gave my initial donation. I didn't get to top it off at work, but I've given directly to somebody who now has the benefit of somebody showing them care, concern, acknowledging them. and that they're worthy just
Mhm.
because they were there. And I decided that my $20 was more valuable in his cup than sitting in my armrest of my car.
Mhm. Yeah,
So yeah,
I
I
like
think if
that.
we do things for others, it goes a long way to helping us nourish ourselves.
Actually, that's and I like that. I was going to ask you if you had advice for people, but I'm going to take that as your advice because it's I agree with it. Um, One of the things someone told me a long time ago is if you are, if you're feeling depressed, if you're feeling sad, the best way to get out of that is to be of service to other people because it's hard to feel these negative feelings inwardly if you're helping people kind of outwardly. Would you agree with that?
I would, with the caveat that if you have some clinical or medical depression situation,
Hmm.
mine was brought on by the concussion. There's a lot of
Hmm.
personality changes that happen. So I call myself Cheryl 2.0 because I realized I was trying to justify my suffering from the accident for years. And then I realized somebody once said, and we don't know, but this is before memes and all this other stuff. Mother Teresa was once asked in an interview, "How come you aren't going to these anti-war rallies?" And she said, "Because they're still about war. If you have a peace rally, I will be there."
Mm.
That if we're still talking about anti-war, we're still talking about war in some frame of reference. So how do we reframe our language to ourselves? So
Hmm.
I'm depressed, I'm sad and blue, or I'm having a rough day today and I'm going to be gentle with myself, which is what you're
Hmm.
talking about before, and say, it's okay to feel a little down or overwhelmed today. It's okay that I don't feel better than I do right now. And somehow I think when you say that, it starts to change something somewhere. And I don't know what it changes or what mechanism happens, but it does. So, but if you're having depression that's brought on by some other circumstance, those are harder
Hmm.
to manage. So, yeah. And I think sometimes you just have to be good with yourself. Just be gentle with yourself and admit it's okay to have a hard day or a hard period or a hard week, and try and find and make a list of dream. I mean, people have gone through vision boards and there's all kinds of tools people have used and claimed are instrumental in them moving forward. But just make a list, dream, cut out pictures, just do something for yourself. Whatever that looks like and whatever you can do in the moment is enough
Hmm.
because you're doing something. Go get a coloring book from and color a kid's coloring book with
Yeah.
wax crayons if you have to. Whatever you think you can do right now is enough because you're doing something.
So I'm going to ask you a random question. I don't know if it's random, but you mentioned a couple times that you enjoy scuba diving.
Hmm.
Is there something cathartic about scuba diving for you? Is there something? I have a friend who um he's really transformed his life over the last couple of years. And one of the things that he does and he looks forward to is scuba diving. And he goes on some crazy trips and I love seeing the pictures. But for you, is there something cathartic about scuba diving that just helps you?
First time I saw it, I was snorkeling off Key West on some catamaran thing, and I saw people, regular people and teenagers at the bottom. And I was like, they're regular people. This isn't Jacques Cousteau and his team. And I got back to Montreal, found out there was a local dive shop, and said, okay, where do I sign? I don't really care what's involved. Just like, yo, I want to know how to do this. And it started there. The internet was just beginning to form. Early adopter of technology for forever. Was on the ICQ board and what have you. And I found this international board that had forums for all different countries around the world. And again, this is still really at the infancy of the internet. Um, and one of them was in California. I said, oh, I was wondering, Dad's down there now. I wonder if there's diving in California. And some of the community there said, well, you got to come down here. If your dad's down here, come down and dive with us. And so I did. And I think the first time my head ever went underwater, especially in the ocean, um, it sort of it enveloped me to the point where I feel like that I should have been born a fish.
Mhm.
Like it's that stark. So when I dive under the ice, and I've done blue holes and gone 153 feet deep in the oceans and done all kinds of crazy things and gone through decks of wrecks and ships, and uh,
Mhm.
do my own photo and video of sharks swimming with me. And so, yes, but it's a beautiful world, and we're such a few in number who get to experience it. What we're doing to the planet is sacrilegious and terrible, and but what we're doing for the ocean, like the SpaceX rocket that was allowed just to drop last night, 2 nights ago, into the Indian Ocean, and all I could think of is, you've just put a volcano plum in the middle of this ecosystem, and you don't even care about it. You're just like, oh, it's safe because it just dropped into the Indian Ocean. So cathartic is yes, but it's a passion, it's a skill, it's intellect, and I think it aligns with my brain. So when I say do something, whatever it is you do, there's things that are going to feel good and easy. Follow that ease, because that easiness is your pathway to things that are going to make you feel better and maybe open up pathways and avenues of a new job, a new hobby, a new group of friends. Life has got its own challenges. So when I'm diving, it's ease, even though it's extremely mental, focused, data driven. All our equipment, are you in salt water or not salt water, on a boat, diving from shore? Are you in a dry suit? Are you in your bathing suit? So that's even before you even get in the water,
Mhm.
and all those parameters. So I think it just aligns with my brain. And for me, it brings ease, it brings me calm. And I just can't wait back. Every time I come out of the water, my next thought is, when can I get back in?
Wow. So, and then you were mentioning you have your next adventure is in the Red Sea, is that right?
Yes.
When is that?
June 2026. It's a private group called Girls at Scuba, and they're international, and they do a lot of dive trips. And I've always looked at it like eye candy and
Hmm.
thought one day, but like I'm working, and a trip came up that would have been one of my dream trips, and at a price that did not make any sense. And so that's it. Sent in the deposit there that night, and because they have limited people who can fit on a dive boat. First of all, it's a
Hmm.
private group that I've been following for a number of years now, and it's, yeah. So I'm really pumped.
That's awesome. Good for you. Um,
Just do it. You
just do
find
it.
something that makes you feel good and just do it.
And I love that too, that advice of, not to say do easy things, but if it feels easy to you, it aligns with the way your brain works. It aligns with your energy. And I think like if you follow those interests, you're going to go into a world that you're almost naturally going to find a passion. Um, you're a really like inspirational person. Talking with you is, just
That's
just
generous.
just
Thank
to
you.
see, what you've been through, but how you're able to come through and how you're able to share your story and help people. It feels to me like, obviously everyone's heard the term of the hero's journey, or most people, where, life kind of throws things at you, and a lot of people sadly aren't strong enough to overcome those things. But the people that are strong enough to overcome them, they come out the other side able to help other people. And I feel like that's kind of what you've been able to do.
Thank you. That's very generous.
Yeah. So thank you very much for sharing your story. I appreciate that.
Oh, thank you for the time. My pleasure.
And like I said, I'm in Banff, so I got to go enjoy the snow and the craziness here. But enjoy Montreal, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Take care of yourself.
Okay. Take care, Cheryl. Bye bye.
Bye.